Welcome back, everybody. We're now at episode 10 of the Pharmland podcast. Our title today is the $471 billion questions, which is basically GLP-1s expanded. It was our first episode that we did GLP-1s, right, Tom?
It was.
And who would have thought we'd be talking about this a year from now?
I'll tell you what, it has been unprecedented and unbelievable, the impact of GLP-1s, not only when they started in, 2023, mid-2023, but just seeing the impact increase throughout 2024 and even more so into 2025.
Exactly, which is why we're going to be talking about that today on Pharmland. And as a reminder, Pharmland is here to serve up the freshest pharmacy information and insights to benefit advisors, employers, and anyone else, for that matter, looking for a better understanding of the industry. We'll take the biggest topics, dig deep, and offer perspectives that you won't find anywhere else. And Pharmland, as you know, is brought to you by RX Benefits. I'm Bradley Nelson, and this is my counterpart, Tom Davies. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Bradley.
Awesome.
Good to be here.
Glad to be here and glad to have y'all listening today. So we're going to start off with a question, Tom, to really just go on the GLP-1 craze, as we mentioned, into 2025. How are some of these newer expanded indications for GLP-1 drugs, how are they impacting the pharmaceutical landscape, plan sponsors, and patients?
That's a really good question, right? Because I think we understand to a degree just the impact of GLP-1s had within patients with type 2 diabetes. We saw a very large impact associated with patients with type 2 diabetes utilizing these drugs, right, to manage their diabetes. What we've seen, though, subsequently is we've seen additional indications being rolled out for these drugs in particular. The weight loss, of course, which has been a very hot topic in 2024 and continues to be a very hot topic in 2025 for the agents such as Zepbound and Wegovy. We've also had some cardiovascular label expansion specific to Wegovy for the prevention of secondary cardiovascular events. Zepbound just recently got an approval late last year, I think December of 2024, for the treatment of obstructive sleep apnea. We've seen Ozempic, which is the diabetic version of Wegovy, receive a recent chronic kidney disease label expansion. And as we look at the pipeline moving forward, label expansions and continued development with GLP-1s will continue to lead to ongoing utilization, larger and larger number of patients potentially utilizing these medications as well. So I'm just looking at it from the clinical side of things. But what else is driving GLP-1 or continues to drive GLP-1 interest?
Well, I look at it like this. You just went over a lot of label expansion or potential label expansion, which you start thinking, this is more population. You're going to get more market share if you're companies that dive into the space. It's the well that doesn't seem to run dry, does it? You hit on diabetes. It's roughly 10% of the adult population, 20% that have pre-diabetes. And if I remember correctly, I think Lilly is actually potentially pursuing a pre-diabetic indication for some of its GLP-1. So if you have potentially 30% that are either diabetic or pre-diabetic out of 330 million Americans, of which that's what, I don't know, rough guess, 270 million adults.
About 270 million are adults. Yeah.
You have that for diabetes, and then an additional 100 million Americans that are with obesity. So, yeah, there's some overlap. But just going from year to year, there was, I believe, 700,000 new GLP-1 prescriptions for diabetes and obesity just in February of 2024 when we first started this podcast.
Yep.
And it's gotten even bigger. So you shared an interesting little tip with a group discussion the other day.
Yeah, there's a lot of study around GLP-1s and just the overall public awareness, right? And so there was a survey that was conducted by KFF, which is an independent healthcare organization. They did a telephone survey of several thousand people. And the intent behind the surveys was to try to garner some understanding around just the overall awareness of GLP-1s by these patients population, adults that are making these outreach calls to. And what surprised me with regards to the responses they received back, based on their survey results, there was 12% of the population that had either were currently on a GLP-1 or had at least tried a GLP-1. So 1 in 8 respondents had some interaction at some level with the GLP-1. That is, to me, I know that I live it day to day, right? We live it day to day. We're having conversations with clients. I see it on the prior authorization front of things where 40% of our overall requests are GLP-1 related. But to hear those numbers, that 1 in 8 of these respondents, and we apply that now to the adult population, because there's nothing unique about this population that they surveyed. If we apply that now to the general population, that's a huge number that are either on a GLP-1 or have tried it in the past.
And a lot of it, I'm assuming, it's some things that we've talked about with social media trends, celebrity endorsements. At least now I know that Elon Musk may be the only one in his family, at least according to this KFF survey, that is going to be on a GLP-1 for the foreseeable future. So there is that little joke that you can tell everybody later on. But I think now they're talking about the cost of GLP-1s in 2024 was roughly $48 billion. And that's
revenue. Yeah, the marketplace revenue associated with GLP-1s was about $48 billion.
And I think they said back in 8 years from now,
10-fold increase.
10-fold increase.
10-fold increase.
So obviously, new prescriptions for those with diabetes as well as obesity, but you just hit a lot of expanded indications. Risk associated with chronic kidney disease for Ozempic. You mentioned secondary cardiovascular risk prevention with Wegovy, obstructive sleep apnea with Zepbound. So what other indications beyond those that just recently got the label expansion, what other indications are being considered?
So there's a handful of additional indications that are being considered, and just for timeline wise, right? We have some reasonable understanding that in the next 2 to 3 years, there's likely to be additional label expansion within GLP-1. So it's not 5, 10, 15 years down the road. These are pretty fast follow-ups, right? And so one of the studies now is the utilization in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's now been transitioned to NASH. It's a pretty impactful, oftentimes a comorbid condition for patients that are obese or with diabetes, but it's not always the case, right? And if we look at that condition and that potential number of patients that could qualify for that, it's really hard right now to track the exact incident rate. But what they're saying in the U.S. population, anywhere from 1.5 to 6.5% of the U.S. adult population has NASH to some level, to some degree, right? So that's anywhere, if we think about the impact associated with that, that could be anywhere based on if we take out patients with diabetes, if we take out patients that are obese. Now, this is just a new indication, right? There's a potential this could then have a treatment for a cohort of patients that's 7 million members large.
Wow.
So NASH is one that, so additive potentially, right? It's going to be interesting based on the data, where they studied this drug with regards to severity of the disease. I think it's basically at this point going to be approved for the utilization in NASH. And the reason why I say that is if we look at the treatment guidelines for NASH today, GLP-1s are recommended off-label for their utilization. So a new agent being studied for NASH is likely to be approved. And then we're looking at time frame in 2026 for the NASH indication, but they're also looking at it in Alzheimer's disease. They're looking at it in psoriasis, addiction medicine, osteoarthritis, IBD, substance
that
abuse.
one makes sense. So
yeah.
I asked you the question a minute ago about additive. So if I'm a plan sponsor, I start to get horrified. How many more members are potentially going to be accessing these medications? So you mentioned NASH could be a potential additive, but is osteoarthritis, which we typically see in overweight to obese individuals, or heart failure, which is often comorbid condition,
Mhm.
diabetes or obesity, if you were to just look at the puts and the takes, do you have any advice for a plan sponsor or just for benefit consultants of what to anticipate that these added indications will do?
It really goes back to the data, right? So getting an idea of, based on the data that you have available, and oftentimes it takes the integration of the medical claims data as well, right? To identify some of these populations that potentially don't have comorbid diabetes. Because as a plan sponsor, right, the silver lining being is if you have a patient with diabetes and NASH, potentially I can use the medication, the GLP-1 indicated for diabetes, which they're already on, to then also treat the liver disease that they may have. That's a good thing, right?
Yep.
That is something that I always refer to it as kill two birds with one stone type of approach. The concern ultimately you have is that cohort of patients that may not have diabetes, right? Or that historically we have not covered the weight loss medications, but now we may consider covering a weight loss GLP-1 for the downstream costs associated with osteoarthritis and joint replacement. So it's really diving into your data, get an idea of where do those populations diverge, and then from there getting an idea of if we saw 50% uptake associated with this medication, this is the potential cost increase you would have with the additive GLP-1 utilization. The comorbid conditions, NASH, osteoarthritis, um, they worry me. They worry me less to a
Okay.
degree, right? Two birds, one stone approach. Some of those other conditions that they're studying the utilization of this drug in, the standalone conditions, Alzheimer's being a very good example of this, is that gets approved, right? Then your population is not something that today you have some level of GLP-1 treatment in today. If it gets approved for Alzheimer's, and depending on how it gets approved, gets approved for the treatment of the cognitive decline or for preclinical Alzheimer's. So when the plaques
Oh,
form,
wow.
but you don't have outward symptoms of Alzheimer's, your population goes from about 7 million patients today with diagnosed Alzheimer's to this term that's being used now as pre-Alzheimer's, and that population is about 50 million.
Wow. So what you're saying is this could be the tip of the iceberg, or it could be just a red herring. It just really is dependent on really the regulatory process, what gets approved, does the data from these trials justify um, coverage, or not coverage, but approval of these medications. And then, based off your comments about comorbidities, if many clients, we'll talk about this as we come back from the break in a moment, that there's some clients that might not want to cover weight loss, and some of these are tied as a secondary prevention for obesity agents, and what might be coming in the marketplace uh, that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid might cause all clients to, or all plans to be forced to cover the stuff. So we'll probably cover a little bit more of that after the break. But ultimately, there's a potential help on the way for some patients. Um, maybe, maybe not.
I think there's an opportunity. There's going to be competition, and we'll touch on this after the break. But there's going to be competition. So, with competition, it's my hope that there's going to be some downward pressure in the marketplace associated with GLP-1s and driving down the overall cost of the GLP-1 from that $1,200 range. Can we get closer to $500? Right. That's very much in line with some of the newer oral non-GLP-1 diabetic agents, right? And some of the cash prices that are available today for the weight loss medications that's being offered by Novo and Lilly. So that is my ultimate hope, that there is some level of silver lining associated with additional marketplace competition.
Got it. Well, I've got Tom's point. I'm going to offer a counterpoint after the break. So we're going to go into the break and open up with our news of the weird segment. Some of y'all have written in and said, "Oh, you love news of the weird." Some of y'all have written in saying, "Why news of the weird?" Well, I like news of the weird, so we're just going to go ahead and continue on. And our initial pilot episode that we had, we talked about GLP-1s, as we mentioned at the top of the file. And and we mentioned the topic of Gia monsters and how that particular drug, original drug that was developed by Ada, actually came from saliva of a Gia monster. So we're going to continue the news of the weird with another reptile, a turtle. So, Tom, do you like to travel? Or have you been traveling a lot lately?
I've been traveling a lot. I wouldn't say I like it, but I've been traveling. Yes.
So, have you seen anybody get pat down during the security line at
Of
an
course.
airport? Of
Of
course.
course.
Have you ever been
When it's not my lucky day, yes.
okay, making sure that it wasn't you that got patted down
No.
at your local airport? Well, back on March 11th, the AP reported that an individual who will remain unnamed. No, it's not Florida man. In this case, it's actually Pennsylvania man. Pennsylvania man was at a New Jersey airport in Newark, and the body scanner went off. TSA officer did the pat down, and lo and behold, there was something in just in the nether regions of the pants of this individual. So, needless to say, I can almost not get this out with a straight face. The man reached in his pants and decides to pull out a box turtle. Yes, yes.
Oh my God.
It was,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. Not to be sad, but it was actually wasn't a box turtle. I'm doing a disservice to turtles everywhere. It was a red-eared slider turtle. Very
Oh, good. Well, that makes a
yeah,
huge difference.
a
Yeah,
huge difference. I'm just glad it wasn't a snapping turtle.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
that could have
I,
been a problem.
I
But
almost went there, but I left it up to you. I was like, I'll just see if he goes there.
yeah, I did go there, and the man's name was not released, much to the relief of whoever lives with him, and that they were escorted from the flight area and ended up missing their flight. But here's the here's the downside of the story: the poor turtle, and I'm not going to tell you the turtle's name for protection of the turtle. He was confiscated, and it's not really. It was never clear whether or not the turtle was actually the man's pet or why was he in his pants.
There's so many unanswered questions.
Yeah, I told you it was a reptile story, and I bet you thought it was going to go a lot different.
Yeah, well,
All right, so
never know what you're going to come across.
that's true, and we had to open up episode 10 with a bang,
Yep.
and yep, that was with a bang. So let's flip it over to the second part of our segment of to continue on our discussion of GLP-1s, and Tom, you kind of alluded to this.
Yeah,
They're pricey.
let me ask you the question. You're the numbers guy.
Oh no, no, okay,
No,
sure. What the
you already
heck?
got your calculator out, right? Just
I sure
how
do.
pricey are GLP-1? So why are we having this discussion? Why have they been so impactful?
Well, you
I
just
talked
went.
about utilization, label expansion, ongoing development, but
Well, even if something were very cheap in large quantities, it could make an impact.
mhm.
The only problem is these are not, I mean, these might not be the specialty medications that everybody's freaked out about, but they're pricey enough that in large numbers, they can destroy a budget. So an out-of-pocket cost, if you're looking at average wholesale price, it's around $1,600 a month for Wegovy. Comparable product of Ozempic is roughly around $1,200. We know that's not what's paid, and that for all you consultants out there, we know it's not what's paid. But even if you were to look at net cost, um, it could be a range. Let's just assume you have a flat rebate guarantee. It could be about $600 for Ozempic and maybe $1,000 for Wegovy, and then Zepbound and Monjaro are kind of in between. And once you start throwing that in there, it's and along with the utilization impact and the expansion of the labels, you got yourself a tsunami that is you got to figure out what to do. and ask yourself, are these products are they really going to do something positive? So I wanted to bring up something, that counterpoint I told you about, um, what you mentioned before the break. So there was an actual study that was completed in 2024, about 6 months ago.
Mhm.
It was a 2-year real world evidence study of obesity GLP-1 usage. And it found that individuals who newly started the drugs for weight loss experienced an average of $4,206 higher cost
Mhm.
of care in the second year compared to members on this plan. I believe it was a prime therapeutic study,
Mhm.
um, that for people that were not taking a GLP-1 drug for obesity. So that's that's really the key, is
Right.
that you're paying for something and the net cost is actually higher than if you were not to pay for this particular product at all, which comes in a question, is it worth it? Well, let's talk about that. So you've heard this study. Do you remember how many people dropped the drugs after 2 years?
So, I mean, it really it varied, right? But if we're
Yep.
looking at weight loss in particular, there was almost 90% discontinuation rates of
Yeah.
the weight loss drugs. And if we think about just the therapeutic window of utilizing a weight loss drug, right? It's really you've got to get into that. If I remember correctly, that 8 to 12 week range or so to really see the clinical benefit
Yes.
associated with the utilization of a weight loss drug. Many of these patients that start trials or start the drug for weight loss don't stay on longer than 4 weeks. So they may not stay on it for longer than 4 week in overall duration, right? But it may be episodes of utilization. And if we think about that from a plan sponsor side of things, if you're paying for the drug but potentially not seeing the long-term benefits of the weight loss associated with that, that feels like a lose-lose situation to me.
Agree. And there have been some studies that are the flip side. If you have um, good adherence, if you have accountability programs, you can actually have better outcomes. And yes, you might be paying more, but you will have people that actually stay on the drug, or if they do discontinue because of those lifestyle modifications, they actually continue their current weight. The issue that we have today is that, and obviously there are long-term studies that say if you have a lower BMI, you could have a long-term benefit. But the key is you can't have a long-term cost benefit if you're on these drugs forever. So if
Yep.
you discontinue them and continue the habits, that's a success story. But we don't hear a lot about discontinuation. So now we're talking about, how do we get these drugs cheaper? So what are ways to get these drugs cheaper for accessibility issues, for accessibility reasons?
Our friend the compounds,
You know, I love compounders.
that's one. It's funny in that KFF study, right? In addition to asking about, the population they reached out to who has experience with or on currently on a GLP-1, they also asked about, of the group that has experience with, how many received a prescription for it versus other means. What would you guess of that population? What would you guess received a prescription for a GLP-1?
I
80%. 80%
really,
had received a prescription, which is a good thing, right?
I
But
was
then
going to hedge my bets and say 50%, just to hedge my
there's that
bets.
20%, right? That, and it could be as high as 50%. Maybe they weren't just forthcoming during the survey, but that 20% is really the population that today our clients and plan sponsors may not be accounting for.
Mm. That they're just getting it out of pocket, and if you
They're
decide to,
paying out of pocket because compounds, as you know, I have street signs that I see on the way to take my kids to soccer on getting your terzepatide or semaglutide compounded. Just scan this QR code. It's almost like um, vote for me signs. It's just so pervasive within the marketplace today. And the FDA has come out and said, look, the shortages have been resolved, which is why the compounds were allowed to be in place, or these compounders were allowed to do what they do prior to this, was their shortages. The FDA has come out and said, look, the shortages have been resolved. What's going to happen to that population now that historically has had access to compounds?
If I were to make an assumption, I'd say they'd stop taking the medication. Or if you're a plan sponsor listening to this, they're going to be talking to you shortly. You're going to have knocks on
Yep.
your door asking, why should, we need to cover this. We need to cover this. We need to cover this. So you need to be ready because this, to what Tom was mentioning is compounding is going to stop sometime in the next 6 weeks or so. So just be ready for those conversations. They're going to come up. Um, and and Tom, just to kind of continue on that, you mentioned briefly about I think it was Novo Nordisk Novo Care program and the Lilly program for being accessible to these
Mhm.
medications. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so these are the cash programs that essentially allows patients interested in, or members, or persons interested in getting access to weight loss medications that currently have maybe lack of coverage through their pharmacy benefit plan to access the manufacturer directly at essentially $500 a month. Now, the Zepbound product has been this Zepbound cash payment program has been in place for probably 6 to 8 months now. What was unique about that? It was not the pen injector that's available through your pharmacy benefit, right? It was a vial of medication that you would draw up in a syringe and give yourself the medication. And one of the reasons they said that potentially our cost is less than what you would be charged for the generally available the Zepbound product is because it's not within that particular administration device, and there's costs associated with administration device. What's different about what's going on with Wegovy? It's the exact same product that's available through the pharmacy benefit for groups that cover weight loss.
So,
So that's some option as well. $500. I don't know with regards to population. Does that increase the potential for utilization? I don't know how large that population is, but we can see cash payment of this drug is significantly less than what we're seeing through the traditional pharmacy benefit.
got it. And you had asked me a moment ago, about the costs and the numbers and things like that. Just to throw some things out there, if compounds go away and then as a plan sponsor you decide to cover things for weight loss, or you might have some leakage. Some pharmacy plans might not necessarily have controls over off-label use, right? And that has the
Mm-hmm.
potential to increase costs, right? Uh, you know, Tom, I know you've done prior authorization in your lifetime. Uh, when your team is doing reviews in the past, or even right now, for those that we're reviewing, what's the general potential off-label use rate on some of these things?
So we're seeing a variety of different conditions or requests that come in associated with the utilization of GLP-1s, right? And a vast majority of the ones that we are denying is the utilization of a diabetic GLP-1 for weight loss, for groups that don't have weight loss coverage in place. But yeah, we're getting a lot of off-label requests. When we started to really see an influx of GLP-1 requests in 2023 or so, we were seeing about 50% denial rates
Ooh,
associated with off-label requests. Now, our denial rates have decreased, right, as we're seeing more and more requests for GLP-1s for that type 2 diabetic population. As some of the shortages within the marketplace have resolved, there's more access to drugs. Therefore, we're seeing more prescriptions written for said drugs. So we're seeing an increase in approval rates because they are type 2 diabetics. They've checked all the necessary boxes and are going to use this medication on label.
okay. So I've heard a couple things from you just in that is that we had a lot of off-label use, or at least attempts
Pursued.
pursued early on. Since shortages have been resolved, you're now seeing those attempts being diluted by actual patient needs. And now on top of that, and at the before the break, we started talking about expanded indications. So even on those expanded indications, I think I did some rough math on this, or my lovely producers did the math on this. Can you believe
You're the numbers guy.
we
Remember,
have
you're the numbers guy.
producers now? Um, but if we had, a plan with just a 1,200 member group, um, uh, and if you look at just the expanded indications that have been approved, you could potentially, and also those that are in late stage trials, you could potentially increase ingredient costs by um, to a plan anywhere between 75,000 and 180,000 per year. So you're just talking about backfilling based off the shortage on those with type 2 diabetes. But there's another uh, potential backlog of people that may not have diabetes, or have they have the diabetes and they've switched from, say, a Farxiga or a Jardiance and SGLT2 for chronic kidney disease, and they migrate over to a GLP-1. You could see a cannibalization of one drug in favor of another, right?
Yep.
Well, and then I guess on top of that, uh, I
So
guess,
I want to end on somewhat of a
yeah,
good note, right? It's
got
of
to land on a
course
good note.
extraordinarily important to
Seems doom and
to
gloom.
ensure appropriate utilization, make sure that it's the right patient at the right time. They're benefiting from drug. I think that's something we often miss here as we start a
Yes.
member on a drug, right, or a patient on a drug. We just want to validate that they respond to therapy, because even within the clinical trials where we saw 80% of the population have a significant decrease in their A1C, there was still a population that did not benefit from these drugs. So how do we make sure that we're transitioning to a more effective agent or an effective agent if they've tried and failed the GLP-1? That's really important. But it's the competition for me that I guess I'm most excited about as we see additional entrants within the marketplace, outside of the big players, the Lillies and the Novos. The opportunity for these other entrants to come into the marketplace, competition, I'm hopeful, will drive down costs. There is a molecule that's being studied. It's an oral molecule. What's unique about this particular medication is it's manufactured differently, so it's a less costly manufacturing method than the peptide-based manufacturing method that's going on now with regards to some of the other GLP-1s. I'm hopeful that less cost associated with development or expense associated with development will be then conveyed to the ultimate market price. So I think that's an exciting development, is different manufacturing standards or processes may bring down the cost. That is encouraging to me. Competition, I'm hopeful, is a good thing within this category. There's ongoing study associated with this. There's 3 or 4 more agents that are very close to being approved for weight loss, right, with varying degrees of efficacy. Once you get a market basket that goes from 2 market leaders maybe to 6, is there some opportunity to pull some additional strings there, right, where you could potentially prefer one agent or another, or there's price concessions on a drug that potentially, rather than offering 25% weight loss, only offers 20% weight loss. I think those are opportunities that excite me moving forward.
Yeah, and this is just kind of throw in a very more of a long-term thought process. And if Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, if they were to actually start mandating coverage for GLP-1s for weight loss, we already know that they're doing it, they're covering it for diabetes, and you start expanding the marketplace. Regardless of your politics, there are some things that CMS has worked on in the past couple of years that's new. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act and the negotiation of certain medications, there's a potential for things to drive down costs low on the Medicare side. And what we usually say in the commercial sector, how goes Medicare goes commercial. Yeah. So if there is a potential for there to have this drug class, and I think I've heard some rumors that this drug class may be in scope in the future because it's a very costly one, Medicare can step in and say, nope, this is the new cost. And just as we've seen with some of the insulin products, as some of the other products, inhaler products that we've seen in 2025, and potentially the SGLT2s in 2026, Farxiga and Jardiance, there's a good chance that we can see cost reductions just because of that aspect of it if they get involved. And they might have to get involved, but sometimes, yeah, that's a 2028, 2029 proposition.
Yeah.
So it's way down the horizon, but there's a reason why I wanted to end on something for CMS and just government intervention and oversight. So That's a little tidbit for the next time on Farmland. Until then, I'm Bradley Nelson.
No babies.
Tom Davies. Love it. Y'all take care, and we'll see you the next time.